Something important is starting to take shape when you really dig into the latest evaluations coming out of inside the Steelers media circle. And if you pay close attention to how this draft class is being re-ranked after the combine and early pro days, there's a very clear signal emerging about where Pittsburgh could be headed in 2026. The biggest takeaway right now is not just about one player, it's about how entire position groups are shifting in value, and how that directly impacts what the Steelers might do on draft night. Let's start with one of the most significant risers that's turning heads. Oregon safety, Dylan Thien. Earlier in the process, he was viewed as a solid prospect, someone hovering outside that elite tier. But after testing and deeper film evaluation, everything changed. His speed, his instincts, his ability in man coverage, all of it started to stand out at a different level. He didn't just climb a few spots, he made a massive leap into the top 15 prospects overall. And when you hear that, you immediately understand the problem. A player like that might not even be available when the Steelers are on the clock. Now you're talking about a potential trade-up scenario, or accepting that elite safeties could be out of reach, and he's not alone. Another name quietly rising is Emmanuel McNeill-Warren, a player who brings size, athleticism, and a natural ability to attack the football. He's climbing boards quickly, and even without strong reported ties to Pittsburgh yet, he fits exactly the kind of defensive profile this team values. So right away, you're seeing a pattern. The safety class is not only deep, it's gaining serious momentum at the top. But here's where things get even more interesting for Steelers fans. At wide receiver, there's a name you really need to pay attention to, Omar Cooper Jr. Out of Indiana, he's not always the headline guy, but internally, his value is rising fast. He was initially seen as a late first or early second round talent. Now, he's firmly pushing into that first round conversation, ranked right around where the Steelers could realistically pick. And what makes him stand out isn't just one trait, it's the fact that he does everything well. Route running, hands, versatility. He's one of the most complete receivers in this class. And when you look at Pittsburgh's need to keep adding playmakers on offense, passing on a player like that could be a real risk. Now zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture. This draft class is absolutely loaded at two positions, wide receiver and defensive back. We're talking about 20 wide receivers in the top 100 prospects and 24 defensive backs when you combine corners and safeties. That's nearly half of the entire top 100 made up of players who impact the passing game. Think about what that means strategically. It means the Steelers don't necessarily have to force a move early if they don't get their top target. There's depth. Real depth. You could go receiver in the first round and still find high quality defensive backs on day 2, or flip it the other way depending on how the board falls. That flexibility is something teams dream of going into a draft. And there's another layer to this that could quietly work in Pittsburgh's favor. The offensive tackle class is strong at the top, but heavily concentrated. Most of the top tackle prospects are expected to go early, possibly creating a run in the first round. And when that happens, something important follows. Other positions get pushed down the board. That means while other teams are scrambling to secure tackles, players at positions the Steelers actually need, wide receiver, cornerback, safety, could start falling right into their lap. This is where draft strategy becomes everything, because now it's not just about who the Steelers like. It's about understanding how the entire board is going to move, where value will appear, and when to strike. There's even a real argument forming that trading back could be more beneficial than trading up, simply because of how deep these key positions are. So when you connect all these dots, rising prospects, positional depth, potential draft runs, it starts to feel like the Steelers are sitting in a very interesting position. Not desperate, but opportunistic. Not forced into one direction, but with multiple paths that could all lead to impact players. And that's where things get really intriguing. Because if the board falls the right way, Pittsburgh could walk away from this draft with multiple immediate contributors without ever needing to make a risky move. But here's the question that really matters when you look at everything that's developing right now. If you're the Steelers, do you stay patient and trust the depth of this class? Or do you make an aggressive move to secure one of these rising stars before it's too late? And that's exactly where the conversation gets even more layered, because once you accept that patience could be a winning strategy in this draft, you start to see how the Steelers could realistically attack multiple needs. Without forcing anything, if they stay put in the first round, the range of options at wide receiver alone gives them flexibility that most teams don't have. We already talked about Omar Cooper Jr. as a perfect fit if he's sitting there, but he's not the only one in that tier. There are several receivers clustered in that late first range who bring different skill sets, bigger bodies, vertical threats, refined route runners, and that variety matters depending on how the Steelers want to shape their offense moving forward. And here's where the depth really becomes an advantage, because even if Pittsburgh doesn't land their top receiver in round 1, the second round is loaded with defensive backs who project as immediate contributors. We're talking about players like D'Angelo Pons, Conte Scott, Chris Johnson, all viewed as strong day 2 options, along with safeties like AJ Halsey out of LSU. These aren't developmental pieces. These are players who can step in and compete right away. So now imagine this scenario. You secure a high upside wide receiver in the first round, and then you come back on day 2 and land a starting caliber defensive back. That's 2 major needs addressed with impact players, without having to sacrifice future picks or reach for value. That's the kind of balance front offices are constantly trying to achieve. But there's another angle here that hasn't been talked about enough, and it could quietly shape how this entire draft unfolds for Pittsburgh. Linebacker. It's not the headline position, but it's deeper than expected in this class, with around 11 prospects sitting inside the top 100. That puts it right alongside offensive tackle in terms of overall depth, and when you look at how modern defenses operate, having athletic, versatile linebackers who can cover, blitz, and adapt is more valuable than ever. So now you're not just choosing between receiver and defensive back. You potentially have a third position group where you can find real value, especially on day 2. And this is where the concept of sweet spots in the draft really comes into play. Everything we're seeing suggests that the first round is ideal for securing a top tier wide receiver if the right name is there. But day 2, that's where things could really open up. Defensive backs, linebackers, even some remaining receivers. There's a cluster of talent in that range that gives the Steelers multiple ways to build out their roster. Now, let's bring it back to strategy again, because this is where the offensive tackle situation becomes even more important. As we mentioned earlier, there's a strong chance that tackles fly off the board early. The majority of the top prospects at that position are ranked inside the top 50, which means teams in need of offensive line help could start a run in the first round. And when that happens, it creates pressure, but not for the Steelers. It creates opportunity, because every tackle that gets picked is one less receiver, one less corner, one less safety off the board. And if Pittsburgh sticks to its board and doesn't panic, they could end up with a player they didn't even expect to be available. That's how value falls into your hands. And let's be honest about where the Steelers are as a roster right now. They've invested heavily in the trenches in recent drafts. The offensive and defensive lines are still works in progress, but they've clearly been a priority. Now, the focus has to start shifting toward playmakers, guys who can change games on the outside, both offensively and defensively. That means receivers who can create separation, defensive backs who can take the ball away, and athletes who can impact the passing game in a league that's built around it. And this draft class, it's built for exactly that. So when you put everything together, the rise of specific prospects, the depth at key positions, the potential for early runs at other spots, and the current construction of the Steelers roster, it feels like this is one of those drafts where discipline could pay off more than aggression. But that doesn't mean staying passive. It means being smart about when to be aggressive. Maybe that's moving up a few spots on day 2 to secure a player they truly believe in. Maybe it's trading back in the first round to collect extra capital while still landing a top target. Or maybe it's simply trusting that the board will fall in their favor and taking the best player available at a position of need. All of those paths are on the table right now. And that's what makes this situation so fascinating, because the Steelers aren't boxed into one direction. They're sitting in a position where multiple strategies could work, depending on how the draft unfolds in real time. So now it comes down to execution, reading the board correctly, understanding where the value is, and making sure that when the moment comes, they don't hesitate. Because if they get this right, this could be the kind of draft that quietly reshapes the identity of this team heading into the future. And if you really think about what that kind of execution looks like on draft night, it all comes down to how well the Steelers read those early signals when the board starts to unfold. Because the first 10 to 15 picks are going to tell them everything. If that early run on offensive tackles happens like expected, you're going to start seeing a ripple effect. Teams that miss out on tackles might pivot to other needs, and that's where things can either stabilize or completely shift. And this is where Pittsburgh has to stay locked in, because the difference between landing a true impact player and settling for a secondary option could come down to just a few picks. Now imagine this scenario playing out in real time. Let's say multiple tackles go early, just like projected. A couple of quarterbacks sneak into the top 10. Suddenly a wide receiver that wasn't supposed to be there at pick 21 is still on the board. That's where the Steelers have to make a decision quickly. Do you stick to your original plan, or do you adjust and grab a player you didn't expect to have access to? That's not panic, that's opportunity recognition. And the same thing applies in reverse. If the wide receiver run starts earlier than expected, and those top names begin to disappear quickly, maybe that's when you pivot. Maybe that's when you lean into the depth at defensive back and trust that you can still find value at receiver in the second round. Because again, this class gives you that flexibility. There's also something else that can't be ignored here, and that's how other teams value these same positions. The Steelers aren't operating in a vacuum. Everyone sees the depth at wide receiver. Everyone sees the athleticism in this defensive back class. So the competition for those players is real. And that's why positioning matters so much. It's not just about identifying talent, it's about understanding when that talent is going to disappear. That's where great draft rooms separate themselves. They don't just react to what's happening, they anticipate it. And if Pittsburgh's front office truly believes in this depth the way it's being evaluated right now, then the smartest move might actually be resisting the urge to chase. Let the board come to you. Let other teams make the aggressive moves, and then capitalize when value inevitably slips, because it always does. Every single draft, there are players who fall further than expected, whether it's due to team needs, unexpected runs at other positions, or just differences in evaluation. Someone always slides. And in a class like this, loaded at receiver and defensive back, the chances of that happening increase. Now, take that idea and apply it to day 2. This is where things could really swing in the Steelers' favor. If they come out of the first round with a playmaker at receiver, they're walking into day 2 with multiple high-level defensive back options still on the board. And if they've done their homework, and which historically they have, they'll have a cluster of players graded similarly. That gives them leverage, because now they can move around, trade up a few spots if they see a run starting, trade back if their group is still intact. That kind of flexibility is what allows teams to maximize value across multiple picks. And don't forget, this isn't just about filling holes. This is about building identity. For the past few drafts, the Steelers have clearly focused on reinforcing the foundation, the offensive line, the defensive front. Now, the next phase is about adding those difference makers on the outside. Players who can shift momentum, create explosive plays, and change the outcome of games. And based on everything we're seeing from this class, the opportunity to do that is right in front of them, but it has to be executed the right way, because if they reach too early, they lose value. If they wait too long, they risk missing out. It's a balance. And this year, more than most, that balance is going to define how successful this draft ends up being. So as we get closer and closer to draft night, keep watching those trends. Watch how positions are being valued. Pay attention to which players continue to rise, because all of that is going to shape the decisions Pittsburgh makes when they're finally on the clock. And if everything plays out the way it's starting to look right now, the Steelers won't just be reacting